First of all, Philip, you made a reference when Deputy Carty was on about Bournemona walking off the pitch. You said they didn't. I would say they ran off the pitch for the simple reason after that, because every one of us have met Bournemona before. There was supposed to be this just transition to 2030. We had a lovely book we're looking at. And then we got word about that High Court case, and there was an opportunity for Bournemona to keep going if they wanted, but it was because of the threat, and it may be very clear, the threat of an injunction, that they wouldn't go any further. Now, if I stopped for every threat I get in life, I'd do nothing. And they knew that there was funding coming to them for all their different things that they're gone down the road now, so I don't accept that one. In the line of wasn't it, what department, was it your department that put together the legislation? I think it was actually under Minister Bruton. Was it your department that put the legislation together that got beaten in the High Court, was it?
It was the two departments, the Department of the Environment and the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. And
when that went in, I was watching the case. How's it those cases weren't appealed on a point of law?
I might ask Les to come in there.
Deputy, without going into the detail of the post-mortem of the two cases, neither department felt there was any realistic prospect of a successful appeal.
Was it badly put together, so the legislation? Was it just a matter of putting legislation together? Was it badly put together when it was felt that way after the first round of a case?
The legislation was an honest attempt to do exactly what deputies were asking here, to absent the requirement for operators to go through a substitute consent process. The courts roundly rejected that approach. So many of the requests for emergency legislation or some form of setting aside of environmental assessment that we've heard, that was tried in 2019 effectively to some degree, and didn't stand up to legal scrutiny.
Say you talk about not going down the route of a single consent system and legislation, and one may be, or that to be sort of the route that we're on at the moment, you'd be better go down that because one would take as long as the other. If I'm a person that is 34, well, 50 hectares, that I have to get an IPC license, and I have to get go through all this. No more than the quarry situation, and I want to be clear on that you're involved in as well, that's in a total fiasco and mess, the quarry set up. Ordinary people don't have money to be running in and out, the cost that's involved. And is it that you're trying to basically export things out of our country, or that big business? If you look at quarries, it's the big quarries that's going to survive, and the small ordinary person is going to be thrown out on top of their head with the stuff that we've in and what it's costing to get there, to get all these licenses. Why haven't we, we might have lost a court case, but why weren't we prepared to go back and bring it to a higher level? Like, an ordinary person loses a case in the district court and they head to the circuit court because they believe they're right. If he believed you were right putting in the legislation, why wasn't it challenged?
Could I just address a point there, Deputy? The Department of the Environment is not responsible for the regulation of quarrying. That comes firmly within the remit of the planning system. I think Les has pointed out the reason why at this stage the judgment wasn't challenged, and it was because there was felt to be not a realistic prospect of success given the robustness of the judgment. It's right. Certainly
I want to go back to one thing.
Just activities or not, and there's no policy decision taken in that vein to do one thing or another. There's no particular agenda taken against peat extractors. I come back to the point that I made at the start. There is not a ban or a restriction. There's a compliance issue.
Yeah, but the compliance issue that's there at the moment is basically making, you heard Matt Carty, and he outlined it very well, that The system that's there at the moment is loaded against you, to put it simple, and you're happier. You've admitted that there's some that there's some coming in from other countries.
I would disagree actually that the system is loaded against. I think, as I pointed out earlier on, there are 800 EPA licenses.
Yeah, look at it. We're talking about two different things.
Mr. Nugent, don't be interrupting Deputy Fitzmaurice. You'll get your opportunity to answer.
There's certain EPA licenses that you don't have to go through the same rigmarole as you do when you're going through EIA and appropriate assessment on the bogs, because I've done all this. Brian Lucas can vouch for everything we've gone through on the bogs. One question I have for you all is, in relation, and Brian will be familiar with this, under the Habitats Directive, you had to say whether a bog was degraded or whether it was restorable, which in my opinion, and from the experience I have, and I think anybody that would be involved in bogs, an awful lot of Bordnamona bogs, even though they're talking about re-wetting bogs, there's an awful lot of degraded bogs that will not be able to be restored. Under this system at the moment, it doesn't even give you the opportunity to state that the bog, where they be working at the moment, to put it simple, the bog is degraded, right? The drains are every 12 metres and the bog will be a degraded bog. You will not, if the projection under EU Habitats Directive was, if the bog, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the bog had to be restorable inside a period of 30 years. Now, with the best will in the world, a lot of them wouldn't have been restorable, the likes of the Bordnamona ones, if we call a spade a spade. From everything I've looked at in legislation under EIA, appropriate assessment, the whole lot, there is nothing there to allow that a bog, can it be restored or can it not inside a 30-year period? And that's laid down in EU law. Why isn't there something there in relation to that?
Okay. Department of Mr. Delaney, do you want to take, you haven't said it, do you want to take the Department of Agriculture viewpoint on that, and then we go back to Mr. Nugent?
To be in fairness with you, to be environment and climate action, in fairness.
Okay, Mr. Nugent, so?
Don't intend to pass the parcel, but in terms of Habitats Directive, I think it's actually more appropriate to the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage.
Mr. Lucas?
Chair, I'm happy to come in if you like.
Yes, Mr. Lucas.
Yeah, so first of all, my understanding is that the sites we're talking about which are being extracted for horticulture, which have been extracted for horticulture, they're not designated bogs, so they're not designated sites in terms of the Habitats Directive. So when it comes to restoring a bog, what the requirements under the Habitats Directive is to restore the raised bog special areas of conservation. So what you would need to do is block the drains and stop them emitting carbon in the first instance, and then. No, but
Brian, Brian, sorry, just to interrupt you. I know all that. I know every single bit of that. What I am saying is, when you're judging a bog, you have to look at a bog to see if it's degraded or if it's restorable within a 30-year period. That's set down by the EU, the way that they do them out. Am I right or wrong on that?
Well, I think what you'd be doing, when the sites were designated as special areas of conservations, you would be looking at whether they're restorable or not. Yes. That does not mean, just take, for example, the non-designated bogs for a minute. Even if they can't become carbon stores, you could still, by blocking the drains, you're still preventing more carbon from being emitted. So that is good from an environmental perspective. But again, as Philip has said and I've said, we've outlined the legislative provisions that are in place, and I'm not quite sure where. I think I've answered the question, but the designated sites are being restored, and that's in terms of what's being done there. For the non-designated bogs, my understanding there's not a requirement at the moment to restore those bogs, and there is provisions under law for peat to be extracted from them.
Yeah, but what I'm making very clear is, there comes a stage that you make a decision whether a bog is restorable or not, whether it's designated or not designated or whatever. A lot of those bogs are degraded bogs that will never be restorable, and we were better to be getting a bit of mill peat off it, making sure that we save the jobs in those areas, and whatever legislation is required to make sure of that, and rather than seeing boats coming in to ports in this country full of peat from other EU countries that appear that they don't seem to have to follow the same regulations or the same court judgments of some judges.
And I would just add to what Brian has said there, but if activity can be reactivated on those sites in a way that is compliant with the EIA directive, then I don't think any department has an issue with that. But fundamentally, it must be compliant with the EIA directive.
Okay. Are you finished, Deputy Fitzmaurice?
I think, to be honest about it, to summarise it all, the season is nearly gone. We're heading out to August. The season is nearly gone, and all we had was a talking shop for the last few months. To be quite frank about it, like, in my opinion, it is putting a ferocious onus and probably a load again it, because, in my opinion, the likes of the environmental lobby and government bodies, government departments, seem to be more interested in closing things in this country than they are in keeping workers and keeping producing stuff in this country. Like, I don't accept that Germany and other countries can be working away, and on top of that, that our department here hasn't looked at peat coming in, that the footprint of that and the environmental regulation in the same EU that them all love, and we here looking at the boats coming in while we have the product here. It's like if you went to sell oil to an Arab, they'd tell you fairly quick where to go. I think that there has to be departments, in my opinion, has to look at ways of resolving this, and by going to Europe. And I asked that question early on. Has anyone gone to the European officials and explained the situation that we are in? Have they gone to DG11, Climate Action or Environment, about this situation? I asked that question at the very beginning, but it wasn't answered. Someone please would the answer that.
Okay, that's a direct question from Deputy Fitzmaurice. Who wants to take it?
The Department of the Environment, Climate Action and Communications hasn't, but leave it to others whether they have. I mean, yeah. Okay,
Mr. Delaney.
Thank you, Chairman. We'd have no remiss to engage, given that we've no competence in the legislation, you know. And again, I suppose in reply to Deputy Fitzmaurice, we still think that the immediate solution here is that regularisation of the sub-30s and looking at that small-scale extraction for the domestic market. That's the quickest way, I think, to get regularised, as Brian has outlined a number of times already today. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lucas, have you gone to the various authorities in Brussels?
No. Just to add to that, there is a provision in the EIA directive which allows for limited exceptions to the full requirements of the directive in exceptional circumstances, and these have been employed under Irish law under section 172.
Can you repeat that, Brian, please? Limited exceptions.
The Article 2.4 of the EIA directive provides for a limited exception to the full requirements of the EIA directive in exceptional circumstances. These are provided for in section 172.3 of the Planning and Development Act 2000. Now, I had a read of the provisions myself, and to me they would seem to require, first of all, an application for planning permission to be in place, and that on board Penala may grant an exemption from the requirement to prepare an environmental impact statement. In doing so, on board Penala must consider whether the effects on the environment of development should be assessed in another form and made available to the public, and board Penala must make available to the public relevant information, including the reasons to grant the exemption. So I don't know what basis any of the three departments would go to Brussels on. I think particularly Philip and to some extent myself and Des as well, we set out that what Irish is set out in Irish law is in compliance with the directive and to ensure compliance with the EIA directive. And there is, as I said earlier, there is a provision in the directive for exceptional circumstances, and they are also set out in Irish law in section 172.3 of the Planning and Development Act 2000.
Brian, you're well familiar with Brussels, and you're well familiar with DG11, and you're well familiar with going back to them talking about different things. Would it not have been a good thing for our Environment Minister, especially, and our Climate Action Minister to go to the likes of DG11 and outline the precarious situation that we have been in, or that we are in, outline a just transition system that we would be prepared to do, and outline the need for this, as you have found out that it's in agreement under the body, the group, working group that you set up. Would that not have been a sort of a rather sensible that you'd have Europe's backing on basically outlining your situation, and also finding out how Germany is able to do it and how other countries in Europe is able to produce as much peat as they want, and here in Ireland they're being shut down. And may I say that in all of those countries they are well over the 50 hectare limit.
Deputy Fitzmaurice was asking, based upon my own experience of many trips to Brussels in relation to peatlands issues, did I see any point in a delegation going virtually? The short answer is, in my view, there would be no point, because the first thing the Commission would say is, well, you have a dual consent system in place, that's a compliance with the directive, and what do you want to do instead? And I think, as I said earlier, to try to say to the Commission what we want to do on a temporary basis is bring in a system that would not be in compliance with the directive, that there be no appropriate assessment and no environmental impact assessment, no appropriate assessment and no environmental impact assessment screening. I think the Commission would say, there's the door, please leave. I don't think that would be a runner.
Brian, has anybody of the three groups that's in, has anyone looked at the German model and other European models where they're able to export it to our country?
Well, going by the interim report of the working group, the dual consent system, the understanding of the working group, it's only in place in Ireland. But each country has to decide how it will comply with the directive and must comply with the directive, whether it's Germany, Ireland or anyone else.
Okay.
The dual consent. Dual consent is only in Ireland, you're saying?
Sorry, Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Am I correct in saying the dual consent is only in Ireland?
That was the understanding of the working group as set out in the interim report, yes.
And does that not tell us that there's something wrong?
But it's important to note that the dual consent system is not unique to commercial peat extraction. It applies to many other activities and development types.
Yeah, I've asked the question though, when we look at Germany and other countries that are able to send peat in here, what you're saying is, for those countries, the dual consent is not applicable for that. The working group has stated, correct?
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong on this point, but I believe that was based on information provided by the peat extraction industry. So that's as far as the information goes on that.
Could you come back to us on that?
I can say what it says in the report. This is the report from the interim report that went to Minister Noonan. It is understood that within the European Union, the dual consent system only applies only in Ireland.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Brian.